There's always something we can learn of the future things to come, and there are going to be so many challenges, and there are always in all fields. But this can be a good thing.
Welcome to the Reproducibility Podcast, Season 3. I'm your host today, Will. I'm a postdoc from the University of Chicago, and where I would like to acknowledge the custodianship of the land by the Kickapoo, Peoria, Miami, and Potawatomi nations. And today I have a very exciting episode. I'm joined by the authors of a very recent fantastic paper on the successes of the credibility revolution by Reproducibility's partner organization, FORRT, the Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Training. So I'm joined by three of the authors. Let's probably go around one by one to introduce them. So first off, Max, would you like to introduce yourself? Give a quick introduction.
Sure. Thanks for being here. It's really exciting to be a long-time listener and then to be on yourself. It's a little unreal, I feel. So yeah, I'm Max Korbmacher. So I'm a PhD student at the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. That's in beautiful Bergen in Norway, and I do my PhD mainly on magnetic resonance imaging biomarkers for health and disease, basically. Yeah.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Thomas, how about you go next?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Tom. It's he, him. So I'm an associate professor at the University of Greenwich. So I get put under the box of occupational psychology. That's the background of some of my initial research. But I think if I'm honest, and I can say this and nobody's listening, right? That's just a little bit of a framing where my real passion is around evidence synthesis, evidence evaluation, and meta research. But surprisingly, they don't give out jobs for that. So occupational psychology it is. But it's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on. I suppose we should finish it off with Flavio. So,
Hi
Flavio,
there.
would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes.
You've been on here before.
Thank you, Will, for making this invite. I really appreciate, and it's always a great pleasure to be here. To introduce myself, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Groningen. I just got that position, super happy. And I do research on political psychology, ideology, and these sort of things. But here I'm a member of FORRT, the Framework for Open Reproducible Research Training, which is just a bunch of folks that get together to hopefully integrate, what we learn from open science into higher education, into our pedagogic teachings and all of that beautiful stuff. And we are trying with doing our best to increase reproducibility, rigor, and ethics through pedagogical reform and meta science. So that's basically me and FORRT. Thank you.
Yeah, wow. I love FORRT. I've been a part of it myself too, creating a bunch of online resources, and has written a bunch of very impactful papers recently. So yeah, I encourage our listeners, if you don't know, go check out the website now, have a quick browse, and then come back to this podcast. But what a great segue into our first segment, the ABRIR teaser, where we're going to talk about one of the recent projects, the recent papers that came out of FORRT. So to sort of set the context, to set the stage, this episode we'll be chatting about the narratives around the replication crisis or the credibility revolution. And my guests, with others from FORRT, published a paper recently that sort of discusses what this narrative is, and I felt had a very positive message behind the current efforts to improve science. So for our listeners, go ahead and search for Korbmacher, Azevedo, Pennington et al. The paper is called "The Replication Crisis Has Led to Positive Structural, Procedural, and Community Changes," and that's in Communication Psychology. So I highly encourage our listeners to go check that out and come back here. So anyway, first I'd like to hear what inspired the paper. How did it get started? So these papers papers don't come out of nowhere. There must have been some sort of discussion that sort of started it all. So I'm curious about how that happened. Perhaps Max, you'd like to share?
Yeah, maybe I start because it's a little bit like really going back to my days as a bachelor student and master student when I heard the first time about the replication crisis. And, it was, I think in the second or third bachelor's year, and I heard the first time about social psychology and all those really exciting findings. And you go through the semester and learn all those things, and it's fantastic. And then at the very end of the semester, there's Neil Kirk coming along, and I'm really thankful for his lecture. But it taught us a lot, but mainly about replication failures and how it's very difficult to publish replication studies. And we all were a little bit puzzled, I think, at the end of this. And then this came a little bit, or then it left me a little bit, this topic, and then it came back in my master studies where we really spent a lot of time thanks to Björn Satrevik at the Bergen University, who really makes an effort to teach people here about the replication crisis and also a little bit what can be done. And but yeah, in the end, it left me a little bit with this feeling of, okay, we've learned all those things about replication failures. We've learned all those things about what's going on, which is maybe not so good, but less about what is actually working, what can be practically done. And so I must say there are, of course, papers, and I must be missing a lot of those great papers who are speaking to what has happened in a positive way. For example, there's this Manifesto for Open Science by Munafo and colleagues. You probably all have heard about this one. And of course, then there's also Simin Vazir's perspective of thinking about the replication crisis as a credibility revolution, something we can actually learn from, right? So there are those things, but I still felt a little bit like, we still need something more feasible, something which people can actually easily get an overview of, because this topic is really big and you first need to go through a lot of papers. So long story short, I just sat down and really tried to write something down, and then I hit the wall and noticed, I cannot do this on my own, and the people in my lab, they didn't have the time. So and luckily I just became a member of FORRT, and there I was so bold, I would say, to just post my idea as a Google Doc and say, here you go, here's an idea, maybe somebody's interested, and if you want, you can join me on the paper. I'm happy for any feedback. And what I didn't know then was that FORRT is an absolutely amazing community with so many helpful people. So within, I think, 2 hours, I got maybe 200 comments, a slightly overwhelming amount of happy people and with happy comments and feedback. And so this is basically when Flavio came in and luckily helped me to organize this project, because I had never done a big project like this before, and I sort of just hopped into FORRT, and there I was suddenly doing this project.
It's so exciting, actually. There's so many threads I want to pull out from that. But first, on the most recent one, it's how FORRT is a community and sort of like, I'm sticking with the sort of FORRT medieval theme, but like comes to arms, I guess, for each other, or like hey, someone's like, I have an idea, and everyone's like, yes, let's go for it. I've definitely felt that wave before. Was that how it felt for you, Flavio or Tom? When you saw this paper, you were like, yes, this is exactly resonating with what I was feeling, or is what I needed, is needed in the field. Like, what was the reception to that from your end?
I have two hats on this. So first, I was super excited that the community is, working as intended, that, we sort of have a sort of an ethos that is unspoken, that is unwritten, but we all we are very constructive, we are very positive, trying, always trying to help. I think that comes with the whole education, pedagogy, didactics part of thing, being more humane when it comes to looking at open science. And that was beautiful. But the other part of me and the organization felt, because we institutionalized sort of proper channels for people to propose projects. And then here comes Max, and he came prepared with a Google Doc that people could give comments. So by the time that I looked at it, it was far too late.
Snowball's already rolling.
Yeah, it was already rolling. And we had just made 2 projects go through the proper channel, which we have a team ideas where people go and they meet with us, like they come at, there's a whole planning of projects, like who can be assigned as lead and all of that. And Max circumvented all of this, but it turned out to be awesome. It was good. We made it work. I think that, the important part is that we were flexible, and we talked to Max, and we were able to hash out the details, and like, okay, this is an organizational project, so let's onboard the project and let's make it work.
Yeah, fantastic.
Tom?
Yeah, I can chip into that. I think I always have to be. I'm always those types of individuals who see a little project going on and be like, yeah, I can do something to help, so I'll chip in. And then obviously it spirals, and that becomes my daytime job, is all of these projects that I really want to do, but probably don't have the time to, but nevertheless make time to. So I think from a more content-based perspective, I think for me, when I saw the draft first, I think it was more a matter of what is the story we're trying to tell? Because I think at first it was a more descriptive, I guess, set of comments about some of the changes that have followed from the replication crisis or the credibility revolution, and I think there was some work to be done around trying to provide some structure to that, and in particular to try and give people a little bit of hope and see a little bit more vision, because I think there's loads of existing literature that summarises some of the great things that have happened within open scholarship, and we could all go around the table and pick about 3 of each, right? But I think here it was perhaps tapping into some of my own personal existential crises around things like climate change and like worrying that there's a lot of negativity going on, and there's a lot of really awful things happening. The world is on fire, and politics seems to be more corrupt than it has ever been. There seems to be increasing societal fractures, and I don't always necessarily think the best way to move forward is to focus on the negatives of those. And I think for us, that was a really interesting opportunity to reframe some of the things. So in the same line as Vazir's credibility revolution, to really think about what has this done for us, and what then does that mean future crises will have for us? Because I think we're all aware that this isn't an isolated incident. We're going to have similar sorts of, or have been having similar discussions around measurement, around theory, around all these really important domains of what we do. And I think that the work that Max coordinated was really important in providing us a framework to look at some of those. So looking at how the structures change, how the procedures have changed, how our practices and our communities have changed, and to really focus on those more positive elements where we can see that there's much more room to continue that growth and scope for a little bit more hope. I think hope's the right word.
I love that. I love that so much. And I mean, I guess let's stick with that theme. Let's go into our next segment. So for our listeners, check out the paper, read it. I think it's really great, and hopefully you can come back to the rest of this podcast episode with a sense of hope. I guess we'll be looking forward towards discussing what efforts are needed to fortify the credibility revolution. Sticking around this theme of hope, I think this paper identifies that there's a need to have a narrative of hope, a narrative of positivity around our current reform movement, as well as potential crises in the future. So I guess my question to my guests here, how important do we think that narrative or that perhaps collective mindset is for us, for our reform movement. Max, if you'd like to start us off.
Sure. I mean, I came to this from the perspective of a student, and I think it's also useful to take this perspective a little bit, thinking of that the future of this whole endeavor of science is built upon people who come into the sciences and build it further and learn new things. So, and for especially students and people who come in fresh, it's just good to encourage, first of all, open science and open science behaviors, and say, hey, this is a good thing, this is a great thing, be excited about it. And so I think, of course, it's important to also talk to all the things which aren't going so well and which aren't great. But I think it's also really useful to always supply a solution to things, to give advice. And I guess this is also what you can see in all those papers which are tutorials. They usually get highly cited. They are what people really like. The criticism is also getting citations, also useful, but especially for people who come in as new, there you want to know, okay, what can I actually do? So for this is probably one of the reasons why I think this positive narrative is helpful. So yeah.
I really got a sense for that from the paper, because I was reading the structural change section and noticed that it really focused on early career researchers, like, for example, embedding this kind of open science discussions and things into the curricula, into the graduate research training. It was very much focused on them. It wasn't saying like current faculty or current researchers need continued training or whatever. It was very much like, hey, we need to inspire the next generation and like train them to understand what's going on, rather than, and with a like to adopt these open science practices rather than saying everything's on fire, everything's in a crisis. Like, that's not gonna help. So I really did get a sense for that. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, if I can chip in, I think what's really driven this this revolution is this greater notion of questioning ourselves, questioning what we're doing, questioning, are we going in the right direction? Are we doing the right things? Are we working in the way we should? And I think there is an important space within that criticality is to acknowledge positives, and I think it's just like in any feedback situation, right? There are times where you'll see on a document and somebody will write something negative and it will be crushing, and other times they will put I love putting little heart emojis on people's papers at various points when I think it's really good, because that is the sort of stuff that just doesn't happen enough. I think there is always a focus on this criticality meaning negative, and I think you can be critical and also demonstrate the value of certain things, and I think that is a key part of what I think this paper attempts to do, is to try and reconstruct that narrative that maintains the criticality, right? We still want to question the evidence behind certain practices. We still want to know whether we are doing what we think we are and having the impact we're hoping for. But we also need to acknowledge that there are some major transitions within the way we do research and the way we talk about research that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. Right, so within the careers of some researchers, that would have been considered ridiculous, absurd, never going to happen. And I think it's important to recognise that these developments have been made, and there has been a lot of work, not just to get something together, but to make that sustainable, right? To embed that, and people say I use that word too much, but to have something that is embedded into the culture, into the way we do things, the environment, and for that to be focused on the positive, I think is really, really, really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's so important to show that progress has been made, and with an eye towards making things better.
Exactly. You can easily go in reference to like the bropen science movement, right? There's loads of communities even within open science and open scholarship that have certain ways of talking about it and critiquing others, and I think particularly given the stance of FORRT, which is to be as inclusive and supporting as possible, I think that's a really important kind of marker in the sand to make.
In an argument that we make in our manifesto, which people also should read.
Let's go read it.
It's still just go read it. It's still a preprint because we really think that everybody that comes in at FORRT has an opportunity to add something to it. It's used as a living document that lays out the vision for the organization, but eventually we'll submit this somewhere. But it describes all the projects, etc. But it also speaks about giving agency to students, whether they are thinking about their careers as scientists in the future, but also as citizens, right? Giving them the agency that they can influence something that is important and shapes a lot society. So it's a little bit of that breaking the glass ceiling, right? So whenever you're talking about, the replicability crisis or the credibility revolution, they feel intimidated. They have been, right? Like science is this really big thing, this really amazing things that generates a lot of progress. So you have a psychological tendency to put yourself a little bit more distance from scientists and science themselves. And then you learn about this in a very negative way, which also takes your agency. So we are not even using that to break that glass ceiling. So I think that what this paper does is, on top of summarizing a lot of the progresses and, has a very nice framework, is to break the glass ceiling in the sense of inviting both citizens, but also future academics to have a constructive approach to the improvement of our science. And that was the goal behind the scenes of, constantly reshaping and reframing the paper towards that goal. And just one more thing, I would say that we're now working on pedagogical and educational resources for the paper, because another worry that we had is like, okay, this is just a paper, but we think that this should be implemented in teaching and in classes. Might be at the end of the class that you talked about, the replication. So, hey, here's a resource that you can hey, here's some hope. Here's how you can contribute, right? So there will be a page on the FORRT website that will provide slides, syllabus, and a reading list of how we conceive of a good course on this topic as well, led by Max, of course.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've long been an advocate for including these kind of materials in early career researcher courses and training and so on and so forth. And there's definitely a space for perspectives on how the change might occur or should occur. For example, on this podcast, I talk a lot about theory of change. Like, what theory do people have driving the reform that they hope to achieve? And I really love, in particular, figure from the paper. So for those of you, quickly scan open to your open tab of the paper. But this, so as the paper highlights, there's 3 sections: the structural change, the procedural change, and community change. And one really nice feature of this figure, which I think people didn't pick up on, was that these changes sort of feed into each other. They kind of have arrows that go around in a circle. And so there's not just it's not just, hey, there's this positive changes are happening. It's like these are feeding into each other, and we can almost multiply the change that's going on. Was that the sort of motivation behind that design of that figure? And
yeah,
so
it absolutely was. And I think this was probably also a bit what we discussed, that all hang together, all those things. So how do we conceptualize it, even just like in the text form? And then the figure really helped to give it a nice, easy overview, I think. And so of course everything hangs together. And I guess this is also why it feels better now than perhaps 5 years ago or 10 years ago, because things are cumulative also in a way that how the system changes. It doesn't change on one subject or on one side of things separately and independently, but things move and on all those levels. And that's what we try to show. Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Max. And I think what's important here is when we discuss reform and when we discuss changing people's practices and behaviours, it's often really seen in that isolation of, if we could get everybody to pre-register their, particular type of quantitative research they do. But that doesn't actually recognise that there are massive flaws in the system, which we can slowly start to erode with following, adopting some of these behaviours and kind of trying to embed that into the things that we do and the communities we discuss. And I think that's a really missed opportunity for a lot of the interventions and a lot of the practices we see in the open scholarship field, which is people like to have their own initiative, their own thing that they can brand in their own way that obviously helps them for their own personal development. But what I think sometimes is lacking is the context of, okay, but if we change this, what are all the other consequences to the other stakeholders involved in the research community? And how do we make sure that there's buy-in from each of those groups and that we kind of can churn that to be a net positive rather than a kind of a continual barrier or a continual challenge that you have to keep addressing? And I think that's a really important part for me, is that we can't change anything unless we change the way we're assessed and how researchers are evaluated, and these all feed into the same discussion. They're not separate things, as much as you can see that there's a little bit of it's not direct, but it's all important in making that transition and that move.
But like perhaps different focuses, but the same goals, the same mission.
Exactly that. And when people talk about open scholarship like a buffet, I think that taps into that, right? You don't have to do everything. You don't have to do every single part of the menu. You just choose what works for you and what works for that context, and you push what you can, just in the same way we all do for things like climate change and all these other kind of societal issues we try and challenge together. And that's so important that it's a community effort, that we all work together on these, because that's the only way these things work. If you don't get that level of movement, those initiatives and changes are never going to be embedded and aren't going to be long lasting.
I just because you made me remember of Charlotte Pennington's book on a student guides to open science using replication crisis to reform psychology, that the whole motivation of the book is exactly this, and she puts it brilliantly. And she's on this paper, of course. She's along with Thomas responsible for the framework and the whole inclusion of education and having those thoughts embedded into our paper. But she couldn't be here today, which is very unfortunate. But she's enjoying her vacation, so that's great that she respects her time.
Also very important.
That's very important. And we miss her, but just to say that I couldn't agree more with this, and that integration is important, and exactly that's why we're working at FORRT, like to try to make this vision sort of pervade every aspect into higher education, right? It doesn't matter whether you teach pedagogy, education, psychology, political science, sociology, as long as you include how we conceive of science, the actual practices, and how we can improve, you're sort of giving agency to students and participating them on your own profession and helping them to aspire to what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to maybe pull in a few more metaphors to try and capture what we're talking about here, we've got I think about terms like critical mass. Like you need to build a critical mass so that the change can sort of distribute and spread through the network. Like it won't start from individual efforts just pinging around. There's got to be sort of a cohesive, everyone together, let's create this change all at once sort of situation. And I also think of a metaphor of like a wave, right? You need something to for things to resonate, and as they resonate, they build, and as they build, it suddenly creates a wave and it crashes down, and we suddenly see the changes that, the positive changes that we hoped we hope to achieve. Do those kind of metaphors sound like what we're trying to capture here?
Yeah, it's really funny. I just had some lectures on magnetic resonance imaging, so there was a lot of waves and a lot of resonance. so that fits. That was really funny to think about it like this. But yeah, the metaphors are very nice. Yeah.
I think your wave is really important, because often with these initiatives, it can be individuals or a very small group of people trying to instigate change and essentially try and convince people that they need to change, and this often requires quite a lot of effort on their behalf, or at least some changes to the way they do things. But I think because the replication crisis has given us so many opportunities, it's given us loads of little starting points, and I think that's what's been really helpful from that perspective. Every time one of those massive paper came out and says, this is a problem, or this is part of the problem, I think these are real important motivators for action, and that it's really important that we jump on those to give them that momentum and to try and build that mass. Because without it, what I think some people are quite scared of is it becoming a little bit cultish, or a little bit kind of, this is my hill that I'm prepared to die on, is that we should all be doing this. And I think that doesn't recognise some of the other factors, like the context that we just spoke about, and how you kind of instigate that change in a more sustainable way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and perhaps the wave is also this nice metaphor of togetherness, or it's like this one unified thing. So everybody is part of this. It's not like, yes, the one methodologist and the other one who's, I don't know, maybe communicating more, or whatever sort of differences there are. But we're all sort of, it's what you said, it's resonating together at least on some level. And this is how very different people bring this change together. So so I like that.
Yeah, nice. There's a quote that I really love in the paper. It's actually, I think, the final sentence in the paper. It's, I believe I'll just read it out. It's, in outlining multiple positive changes already implemented and embedded, we hope to provide our scientific community with hope and a structure to make further advances in the crises and revolutions to come. I sort of want to try and press a little bit more on what does hope look like there? What do you imagine when you're instilling the community with hope? What do you envision?
I think we spoke about that sentence quite a while. There was quite a few versions of that, wasn't there?
Max, go for it.
Well, I mean, it's really hard to give this last sentence summing up the whole paper, and very, very different things which are happening in this paper. And then also being like, okay, this is all we presented, and now be happy, and this is the end. Because of course it's not, and things going to advance, and yes, we can call them crisis again, or opportunities to learn, or revolutions, or whatever we want to call them. But yeah, this hope aspect, I think this is one thing we should keep thinking about. There's always something we can learn of the future things to come, and there are going to be so many challenges, and there are always in all fields. But this can be a good thing. Yeah, and then, I mean, now I'm repeating myself, I guess. But yeah, I think people who come into the field, they are going to be the future. But also, of course, also the people who are here now, and I think we all can learn a massive amount of great things from the revolution, or from the crisis to come. So yeah, I think this is a bit of the hope I hope to put in, but then in one sentence, yeah.
I think so. One thought that sparked in me is that I think a lot of academics and scientists, it's not just the early career researchers, but those who have been in the system have been worn down and have been burnt out, especially under the pressures of the current structures. And this might just be that glimmer of hope for them to keep going, to keep continuing, and to push for the changes and find that agency that Flavio has been talking about as well.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's just what I was going to argue. I think the hope for me represents the possibility that people can have a greater appreciation, understanding of the limitations of the system we work within, yet still want to try, yet still want to keep going, to learn some things and perhaps try and do them a little bit better, despite all the individual barriers, structural barriers that they may face. I think that's really important, that there is, whilst there are these continuing struggles and barriers, as Max says, we're still going to find a way to move forward, because what we do is important.
That seems like a good segue onto our next segment. So a lot of our talk has been high and mighty, perhaps, but perhaps we have some mighty high tea. Time to spill some tea, where essentially in our podcast, we give our guests a chance to rant about whatever they wish, whatever they like. Maybe you'd like to rant a little bit more about hope. Is there something that's on your mind?
Go on, Flavio.
All right. I will say that, as we try to highlight in the paper, so many organizations, so many people across the globe in different disciplines, right? We made so much effort to include everybody. We all are part of this wave, and we are all part of this collective effort to not only improve the way that we do our science, but its robustness, its transparency, and all of that, but also, to hang tight on one another and have a sense of community, right? So if there is some tea to spill, is that we should try to reward these communities that are trying to, build community and find these connections between one another. And I think we think about that very little, and especially when it comes to our reward system and what we value and what we cite, and how we decide to devote our time. We don't take that too much in consideration, and maybe some of us take it for granted a little bit, I would say. So maybe it could be, a little like, what can we do to keep that hope going? It's probably, looking at this paper, but also other papers that try to make the same effort and say, oh, there's linguists here. There's this very open science linguist community. Let me go there. There is this ecologist open science community. Let me go there. ReproducibiliTea, and so on. So, it's just people doing the best they can. And I think, give us a chance, join us, and I'm sure you will find your people too.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna set me off, Flavio, but you are spot on that we need to also recognize and value the people who are community building or who are trying to reform governance or reform the voices that get heard, and are trying to say, hey, we need to bring people together, and I'm gonna put in the effort to do that because I recognize, or the people who take part in this effort recognizes that changes and progress happens when it happens together. So yes, everyone, try and think about who's been helpful building your network and who's been helpful creating the structures that have allowed you to reach and find your community, and thank them, I guess, or say, hey, I value your work. I think that's super important, and it's, as you said, is being taken a little for granted at the moment by many people in science and academia.
Let's go one step further than that, perhaps, if I may, which is there are a lot of people within, here we go, strap yourselves in, everybody. There are a lot of individuals within the system we work within that have privilege and power. And it's really very important about how they exercise that and for what means. And for example, if you are a dean or have a superior or in any other way senior role within universities, you have a responsibility to dictate and to share the vision of the values and the things that you want to achieve. And I think things like contributing to FORRT, whether that be through time or funding or anything like that, but also acknowledging the really important roles that probably everybody who's listening to this podcast does within their institution, that are just under-acknowledged, underappreciated, and tend to feel like it's a little bit of a fight, but they do it because they know it's the right thing. And I want to tell the people who are in those positions of power and responsibility that often construct those barriers, give us a chance, right? Use and yield your power for things that you think are useful for us as a scientific community moving forward. And that doesn't mean sending an email saying, that was great, thanks. That means action. And I think that for me is really important, that we start to transition towards different models and ways of thinking about what it means to be a researcher in the current environment, and recognizing those much more diverse contributions. Does anybody want to take it even further?
Yeah, me.
Go on.
For those who are in leadership positions, recognize that people are doing things like emotional labor, who are doing the like community building, who are reaching out, who are like taking on extra volunteer effort. Leadership shouldn't be about prestige, shouldn't be about the title or the position. It's about, and it shouldn't be just keeping the same structures, reinforcing them, keeping the same barriers, keeping the same oppression of scientists that's going on. Leadership is to elevate others, to take those chances, to take those opportunities, and to contribute in perhaps non-traditional ways, and recognizing and valuing that.
Yeah, it's visions and value. That's what, if you're in a leadership position, that's what you should be trying to demonstrate.
Absolutely. That's great.
Spicy enough tea?
Yeah, that's great for me. I suppose before our listeners desert this podcast because of my incessant need to insert puns at every moment, let's have our delectable dessert segment where we share a tip with our early career researchers, a handful guide or tip for navigating science and open science movement. And I think there's a pretty obvious one that comes out of this episode, and it's to join FORRT. Isn't that right? Maybe each of us could share a little experience they've had with FORRT and how it's been enriching for each of us.
Okay, I think the main, or my main advice would be to don't feel small or not useful or something like that, and you are of value as a, no matter at which career stage, it's, if you do the work, you do the work, that's great, and you can be proud of that. And there will be people who will appreciate it, and if you search for collaborations, then you will find those people. Go stick with it. And yes, FORRT is a great place, is absolutely a great place for that. If you find something else which you might go for, then go for that, please. It's just really, there's this notion in academia, I think, of a hierarchy and of career stages and all those things. And but in the end, we're all researchers if we do research, okay? So I would really like to give some early career researchers that notion.
Yeah, I love that. I love that message. Oh, go ahead if you wanted to say more.
No, I think I talked about my FORRT experience, but maybe a bit more. So I was just a really great experience to work there, even if I didn't know so much about the organization, and I got into this leadership, or if you will, or project lead position, and it was really wonderful. Everybody helped me a lot, especially Flavio and Tom, and also Charlotte and a few others which haven't been mentioned. But yeah, I'm just really grateful that I could be a part of this team. And so yeah, so that's a good place to start if you want to engage with other early career researchers. So yeah.
Shall I go next so Flavio can deliver the final punch, as it were? I've got two things, and I think my tips are for different people. So my first one is, if you're in a position of power, put your money where your mouth is. Easy. Second one is, there is a lot going on, both within open scholarship, within research, within being a human being. I think my advice would be, reach out. And it might be to a friend, it might be to the FORRT community, it might be whatever. Do not struggle alone, because I think there is a lot going on right now which just is changing the way we do things and think about things, and it feels like it's never ending. And I think what's really important is that we don't always have to move as one, but that we support each other and we do the best for each other. And I think perhaps that's my best advice, which is, if you struggle with things, reach out. If you want to work on something, reach out and ask. And I think the FORRT community is a wonderful opportunity if you are wanting more of those opportunities for your career to consider. I said basically to Flavio, no, I'm not going to do this next project with you. And then he talks a bit about it and I get quite enthusiastic, and then all of a sudden I'm doing more than I should do. And I think that is a real testament to the fact that there are there is vision within FORRT, but there are also a lot of really good eggs. There are lovely people who I like to call friends who are within FORRT, and I don't think my career would have been the same had I have not reached out and they reached out to me. So I think it's really important that if you feel that is important, to do so, and whether that's your mental health, your work, or anything else, that we be kind to each other and do our best for each other.
Go on, Flavio.
I just want to say that Max and Tom's testimonials are really, really, really inspiring to hear. Couldn't agree more with them, and I thank them for their participation in FORRT, which has been transformative for the organization. And I also like to call them friends, and I cherish the opportunity to meet them in person and continue that friendship along the way, because that's it's super online. FORRT is super via Slack and all of that, but there's a human side to this. So but in true fashion, that we hope is the FORRT way. I think as the director of FORRT, and also thanks to Max and Tom, who also propped up FORRT, we want to talk about other communities that you can have, because maybe education and pedagogy is not your thing. So if it is to read papers, by all means join ReproducibiliTea. There's so many around, and we are sister organizations, I like to call, because we literally have the same values. If you're in the UK, consider the UK reproducibility networks as well. If you're in the US, there's the Project Tier that deals with a lot of, the reproducible pipeline. There's national reproducibility networks. If you're in economics, there's a Reproducibility Wiki. If you're in Ireland, there's Paper Trail. If you are in the west coast of the US, you have BITS, which is the I forgot the name, but it's BITS, and there's a good community there. If you're into teaching and you're super into teaching, and there is CRAPE, right, the Collaborative Replication Education Project, which has amazing people like Jordan Waggy. In COS, you have amazing folks like Crystal Stettle-Paul and Katie Corker and other folks. There is Nowhere Lab, where it's just like, are you in a global south? Or in an underprivileged country where you just want to have that lab experience, Nowhere Lab is there. And it doesn't matter where you're from, there is ABRIR, which is Advancing Big Team Science, Reproducible Science, and Increased Representation, which is just like a very good community of folks that are, ascending and participating into academia and trying to give everybody a home and feel that sense of belonging, right? So there's many places that you can go to find your group, and all these communities are great. And I can't go without saying, how about OLS, Open Life Science, and the the-turing-way? I mean, I'm so sorry to leave those to last. They are amazing communities. So all just to say is, there's a lot of hope to go around. Join these communities, and you'll see that there's lots to community building.
I love that. I suppose we should end on some little shout outs. If you'd like to let our listeners know where they could follow you or find you or reach out to you. So Max, would you like to just share how we can find you?
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at Korbmacher Max. That's KORBMACHER Max, MAX, right? or I don't know, Google this complicated name, or send me an email or whatever if you have any questions, or on the podcast or on the paper. Or I'm really happy to have a chat. Or if it's about something which I said now at the last minute, so which is if you're an early career researcher and you think, how did you do this as a master student? You write a paper and you engage with many senior academics, and this is probably not the most common thing and the most normal thing as I see. And I had my struggles as well, and I'm happy to chat about it. And yeah.
Tom, would you like to share how we can find you?
I've been getting into forestry and woodland management, so probably the best way is to get the highest peak that you can find and shout towards my general direction. But if that doesn't work, you can always find me on Mastodon. I try to avoid Twitter, although I still exist there in some function, or indeed to drop me an email. And in the spirit of saying that it's important to reach out, if anybody does feel like they're not quite sure where to go or what to do, I'm always an email away. Great.
Flavio?
Reach out to me at flavio.azevedo at rug.nl, so that's RUG. And also at FORRT, info@FORRT.org. It's with 2 R's, not 2 T's. We might buy the URL with 2 T's because a lot of folks think there's 2 T's. And also via Slack. Please join FORRT Slack. I think that's where, we are super open to lurkers. We love lurkers. Stay there, forget that you installed Slack. It can be annoying, but at least to get updated on our projects, on what we're doing. And I hope that's a good way to contact us.
If there's anything that should take up your attention sort of by brute force via notifications and so on, FORRT is a great thing to be the one taking that attention. Yes, I'd like to emphasize that, you can find all of us on that FORRT Slack workspace, which is, as Flavio and hopefully you've gathered from this episode, that it's an incredibly open community, and I think all of us would be happy to receive any messages or comments there.
Or complaints.
Yeah, feel free to send those complaints, especially at Flavio.
It is true. In the website, there's a Google form about feedback. It's anonymous. If you didn't like something I said, go there and, say your will.
Yes. Great. And as always, if you'd like to find or create your own community, go check out reproducibility.org. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.